I've spent 23 years investigating missing persons cases, and I can tell you this much: most disappearances have explanations. People get lost, they have accidents, they sometimes choose to vanish. But the case of the Mendoza family defies every rule I've learned about human behavior and survival. What happened in Yosemite National Park in the summer of 1984 challenges everything we think we know about how people disappear, and, more importantly, how they try to be found. The Mendoza family wasn't your typical tourist group. Miguel Mendoza, 42, worked as an aerospace engineer for Lockheed Martin. His wife, Carmen, 38, taught high school mathematics. Their twins, Sophia and Elena, had just turned 16 and were honor students planning to attend UC Berkeley together. This was a family that planned everything meticulously. Carmen kept detailed itineraries for their annual camping trips, complete with backup routes and emergency contact schedules. Miguel carried 3 different types of communication devices, including a then state-of-the-art satellite phone that cost him nearly $2,000. They weren't novice campers either. The Mendozas had been visiting Yosemite every summer for 8 years, always staying at the same backcountry campsite near Tenaya Lake. Miguel and Carmen had met during a Sierra Club hiking expedition in college, and they'd passed their love of the wilderness to their daughters. The twins could navigate using compass and topographic maps better than most adults. Sophia had earned her wilderness first aid certification at 15. Elena could identify edible plants and predict weather patterns by reading cloud formations. Their final trip began on July 15, 1984. They checked in at the ranger station at precisely 9:30 a.m., just as they had every year before. Ranger Patricia Williams remembered them clearly because the twins had brought her wildflower sketches from their previous visits. The family filed a detailed backcountry permit for a 7-day camping trip, listing their planned route, water sources, and expected return date of July 22nd. Miguel even left Williams his business card and asked her to call Lockheed if they weren't back by noon on the 23rd. What makes this case particularly haunting is how normal everything seemed during those first few days. Other hikers reported seeing the Mendoza family on July 16th and 17th, setting up their camp in the usual spot, the twins helping their parents organize gear with military precision. A group of Berkeley students even shared dinner with them on the evening of July 17th, later describing the family as being in excellent spirits and perfectly prepared for their week in the wilderness. Carmen had shown them her hand-drawn maps, pointing out secret swimming holes and the best spots for photographing sunrise over the granite peaks. July 18th was the last confirmed sighting. A solo hiker named David Chen encountered Miguel and Sophia on the trail to Cloud's Rest around noon. They were heading back toward their campsite, Sophia carrying a day pack full of geological samples she'd collected for a school project. Miguel seemed eager to return to camp, mentioning that Carmen and Elena were preparing something special for their last family dinner before the twins started senior year. Chen described them as being in perfect health and high spirits, with no indication of distress or concern. Then they simply vanished, not gradually, not with warning signs or distress calls. They disappeared as completely as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. When they failed to check out on July 22nd, Ranger Williams initiated the search protocol exactly as Miguel had requested. Park Service teams found their campsite intact, showing no signs of struggle or hasty departure. The tents were properly staked and weather-sealed. Cooking equipment was clean and properly stored. Their vehicle, a red Toyota 4Runner, sat untouched in the parking area with all doors locked and windows up. The search effort that followed became one of the most extensive in Yosemite's history. Over 300 volunteers joined professional search and rescue teams. Helicopters with thermal imaging equipment scoured every canyon and ravine. Trained dogs followed scent trails that led to dead ends at granite cliff faces and the edges of alpine lakes. The search continued for 18 days, covering over 400 square miles of wilderness. They found absolutely nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no human remains, no trace that the Mendoza family had ever existed. The investigation that followed raised more questions than answers. Miguel's satellite phone was never found, despite having a GPS beacon that should have remained active for weeks. Carmen's detailed maps, which she never traveled without, were missing from the campsite, even though all their other gear remained perfectly organized. Most disturbing of all, Elena's insulin supplies were still in their camp refrigerator, untouched and properly stored. Elena had been diabetic since age 12 and required daily injections to survive. The medical examiner later testified that without her medication, she couldn't have survived more than 3 days in the wilderness. Federal investigators ruled out foul play almost immediately. The campsite showed no evidence of violence or struggle. All of the family's valuable equipment, including expensive camera gear and Miguel's Rolex watch, remained in their tent. Their bank accounts were never accessed, their credit cards never used. Background checks revealed no financial problems, no marital issues, no reason why a successful, loving family would choose to disappear. The FBI interviewed over 200 people connected to the Mendozas and found nothing suspicious. Years passed without answers. The case file grew thick with false leads and amateur theories. Some believed the family had fallen into an unmapped cave system. Others suggested they'd been killed by a rogue bear, though no such attacks had been reported in the area. A few conspiracy theorists claimed the family had witnessed something they shouldn't have, possibly related to Miguel's aerospace work. The most painful theory for their extended family was that they'd simply become lost and died of exposure in some remote canyon where their bodies would never be found. As the investigation moved into its second decade, the Mendoza case became one of those legendary disappearances that attracts obsessive amateur investigators and documentary filmmakers. The family's relatives offered a $50,000 reward that was never claimed. Psychics and self-proclaimed clairvoyants regularly contacted authorities with visions and dreams. Every few years, someone would report finding human remains in the backcountry, but DNA testing always ruled out any connection to the missing family. The breakthrough came in 2003, 19 years after the disappearance, through technology that didn't exist when the Mendozas first vanished. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a geologist at Stanford University, was using high-resolution satellite imagery to study erosion patterns in the Sierra Nevada when she noticed something unusual in photographs of a remote canyon system approximately 12 miles from the Mendoza family's last known campsite. The canyon was so isolated that it didn't appear on most topographic maps and had never been surveyed by ground teams during the original search. What caught Dr. Walsh's attention were geometric patterns visible in the satellite images, formations too regular to be natural rock formations or erosion patterns. The objects appeared to be arranged in deliberate configurations across a series of granite outcroppings and alpine meadows. Using advanced image enhancement software, she could make out what appeared to be large stones or logs arranged to form letters and symbols. The formations were enormous, some individual letters measuring over 50 feet in length, clearly designed to be visible from aircraft or satellites. When Dr. Walsh contacted the National Park Service about her discovery, rangers immediately recognized the potential connection to the Mendoza case. A helicopter expedition was organized within 48 hours, led by some of the same search and rescue specialists who had participated in the original investigation 19 years earlier. What they found when they reached the remote canyon changed everything. Investigators thought they knew about what had happened to the missing family. The granite outcroppings contained massive stone arrangements spelling out "Help Us" and Mendoza in letters large enough to be seen from space. Below these messages, arranged with the same methodical precision Carmen Mendoza had brought to everything in her life, were smaller stone patterns forming dates and coordinate numbers. The arrangements showed clear evidence of maintenance and modification over many years. Some stones had been moved recently enough that vegetation hadn't grown around their new positions. The precision and scale of the work suggested it had taken enormous effort and considerable time to complete. But the most disturbing discovery was what the search team found hidden beneath one of the stone arrangements. Buried under carefully stacked granite slabs was a waterproof container holding items that definitely belonged to the Mendoza family. Carmen's hand-drawn maps, Sophia's geological sample collection, and Elena's diabetes testing kit with her name engraved on the carrying case. Also in the container was a notebook written in Miguel's distinctive engineering handwriting, but the pages were damaged by moisture and age, with only fragments of text still legible. The readable portions of Miguel's notebook contained what appeared to be survival notes and desperate calculations about rationing supplies. There were references to watching from above and can't reach bottom, and several mentions of Elena getting worse, followed by increasingly illegible passages. The final entry, dated 3 weeks after their disappearance, simply read, "Told them signal fire, no good need, bigger messages they will see from sky, eventually someone will see." The rest of the notebook had been damaged beyond recovery by years of moisture and temperature changes. The search team spent 5 days methodically exploring every crevice and overhang in the canyon system, but they found no human remains, no additional equipment, and no explanation for how the family had traveled 12 miles through trackless wilderness to reach such a remote location. The canyon itself presented multiple mysteries. There was no obvious water source, though the stone messages had clearly been maintained for years. The granite formations where the messages were built would have required climbing equipment to access safely, equipment that wasn't found with the family's abandoned gear. Most puzzling of all were the logistics of creating such massive stone arrangements. The investigation team estimated that moving the granite blocks into their current positions would have required enormous physical effort from multiple people working over months or possibly years. Some of the stones weighed several hundred pounds and had been transported significant distances from their natural resting places. The precision of the letter formations suggested careful planning and engineering knowledge, skills Miguel certainly possessed, but the project's scope seemed impossible for 4 people, especially with limited supplies and one family member requiring daily medical attention. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had the family reached such a remote location without leaving any trail for search teams to follow? Why hadn't their massive signal messages been spotted during the extensive aerial searches conducted immediately after their disappearance? Who had maintained and modified the stone arrangements over the years if the family members were no longer alive? And most disturbing of all, if the Mendozas had survived long enough to create these elaborate signals for help, why had they never been rescued? Forensic analysis of the stone arrangements yielded more mysteries. Lichen growth patterns on some rocks suggested they'd been in position for decades, but other stones showed clear evidence of recent movement. Soil samples revealed traces of human DNA, but the samples were too degraded to provide definitive identification. Ground-penetrating radar detected several anomalies beneath the message sites, but excavation attempts were blocked by the extreme remoteness of the location and Park Service regulations protecting the wilderness area. The case remains officially unsolved today, nearly 40 years after the Mendoza family walked into Yosemite National Park and vanished. The stone messages continue to be monitored by satellite, and some observers claim the arrangements are still being modified, with new symbols appearing and existing messages being altered or expanded. Recent high-resolution imagery has identified what appear to be additional message sites in even more remote areas of the Sierra Nevada, but their extreme inaccessibility has prevented ground verification. What happened to Miguel, Carmen, Sofia, and Elena Mendoza remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in National Park Service history. The evidence suggests they survived their initial disappearance and spent considerable time and effort trying to signal for rescue, but conventional search and rescue protocols completely failed to locate them. The scale and sophistication of their signal messages indicate planning and resources that seem impossible under survival conditions. Yet the messages clearly exist and continue to evolve decades after the family vanished. The final mystery is perhaps the most unsettling. In 2019, 35 years after the original disappearance, a high-resolution satellite image captured what appeared to be human figures moving among the stone message sites. The image quality wasn't sufficient for positive identification, and by the time a helicopter expedition could be organized, no signs of recent human activity were found. But the photographs sparked new speculation about whether some or all of the Mendoza family members might still be alive, continuing their decades-long effort to signal for help from one of the most isolated locations in North America. The Mendoza case challenges everything we think we know about survival, search and rescue, and human behavior under extreme circumstances. It suggests that people can vanish completely from well-traveled areas and survive in conditions that should be impossible, while remaining hidden from the most advanced search technologies available. It raises disturbing questions about how many other missing persons might be alive in remote locations, creating their own desperate signals for help that no one has yet learned to recognize or interpret. The investigation took a darker turn in 2020 when I was contacted by Dr. Sarah Chen, the daughter of David Chen, the last person to see Miguel and Sofia alive in 1984. David had passed away the previous year, but while going through his belongings, Sarah discovered something that changed my understanding of the case entirely. Hidden in her father's old hiking journals was a detailed account of his encounter with the Mendoza family that differed significantly from his original statement to authorities. According to David's private journal, discovered 36 years after the fact, his meeting with Miguel and Sofia on July 18th hadn't been the brief, casual encounter he'd reported to investigators. David wrote that he'd actually spent several hours with them, helping Miguel search for something in the granite formations along the Clouds Rest Trail. Miguel had seemed increasingly agitated, checking his watch obsessively and muttering about running out of time and "they're expecting us back soon." Most disturbing was David's description of Sofia's behavior. The 16-year-old had appeared to be in some kind of trance state, walking in precise geometric patterns and arranging small stones in complex configurations that reminded David of mathematical equations. David's journal revealed that Miguel had confided something that he'd never reported to authorities. According to the entry, Miguel claimed that his family had been selected for something, though he wouldn't elaborate on what that meant. He mentioned that they'd been receiving instructions through Elena's diabetes monitor, which supposedly displayed numerical sequences that Carmen was able to decode using her mathematical background. Miguel seemed convinced that these instructions were leading them to an important discovery, something that would change everything people think they know about this place. The journal entry ended with David's observation that both Miguel and Sofia had unusual marks on their forearms, circular patterns that looked like burn marks but were perfectly symmetrical and appeared to be healing. When David asked about the marks, Miguel had rolled down his sleeves and changed the subject abruptly. Sofia never spoke during their entire encounter, continuing her strange, stone-arranging behavior while her father and David talked. David wrote that the whole interaction left him deeply unsettled, but he'd convinced himself it was just the altitude affecting the family's behavior. Why David never reported these details to investigators remains a mystery. His journal suggests he was afraid no one would believe him, and he was concerned about being considered a suspect if he revealed how much he actually knew about the family's mental state before their disappearance. Reading between the lines, it's clear David suspected something terrible was going to happen to the Mendozas, but he felt powerless to intervene or explain his concerns to authorities who were looking for rational explanations. Armed with this new information, I convinced the Park Service to authorize another expedition to the remote canyon where the stone messages had been discovered. This time, we brought ground-penetrating radar, advanced DNA analysis equipment, and a team of archaeologists trained in examining unusual human settlements. What we found during this expedition challenged every assumption about the Mendoza case and raised questions about how many other missing persons cases might involve similar unexplained circumstances. The 2021 expedition revealed that the stone message site was far more complex than anyone had realized. Beneath the visible arrangements, radar detected an extensive network of underground chambers carved into the granite bedrock. The chambers were connected by narrow tunnels that formed geometric patterns matching the stone messages above ground. Most shocking of all, the underground network extended for miles in multiple directions, suggesting a construction project that would have taken decades to complete and required engineering expertise far beyond what 4 missing campers could have possessed. When we finally gained access to one of the underground chambers through a natural opening, we found evidence of long-term human habitation that made no logical sense. The chamber contained primitive furniture carved from stone, sleeping areas arranged with military precision, and walls covered with mathematical equations written in what appeared to be Carmen's handwriting. But the equations were far more advanced than high school mathematics, involving calculations related to geological formations, astronomical phenomena, and what looked like architectural blueprints for expanding the underground network. The most disturbing discovery was a workshop area containing tools that shouldn't have existed in 1984. The equipment appeared to be handmade, but incorporated advanced materials and precision engineering that would have been impossible to create without modern manufacturing capabilities. Even more puzzling, some of the tools showed clear signs of recent use, with metal shavings and stone dust that couldn't have accumulated over decades of abandonment. The workshop suggested that whoever was living in these chambers had been continuously improving and expanding their capabilities over the years. Personal belongings found in the chambers confirmed these were connected to the Mendoza family, but raised new questions about their fate. Elena's diabetes supplies were present in large quantities, far more than a family would have brought on a week-long camping trip. The medications were stored in a sophisticated preservation system that maintained proper temperature and humidity levels, using only natural cave conditions and ingenious engineering. Medical equipment found alongside the supplies suggested someone with advanced knowledge had been managing Elena's condition for years, possibly decades. The chamber walls contained what appeared to be a detailed log of daily activities, spanning from 1984 to the present day. The entries were written in multiple handwritings, including samples that matched all 4 missing family members, but the later entries showed significant changes in style and content. Early entries focused on survival concerns and escape plans. Later entries discussed complex engineering projects, astronomical observations, and references to preparing for the arrival and completing the signal array before the window closes. Most unsettling were the recent entries, dated just months before our expedition. These writings discussed surface dwellers and maintaining the deception in language that suggested the authors no longer considered themselves part of normal human society. The final entries referenced our satellite observations and described strategies for avoiding detection during the transition period. Reading these logs, I realized that whoever was writing them had been monitoring our investigation and staying one step ahead of our efforts to locate them. The expedition team spent 2 weeks documenting the underground network, but we were only able to access a small portion of the tunnel system. Many passages were blocked by carefully engineered stone barriers that would have required heavy equipment to move. Other tunnels disappeared into geological formations that our equipment couldn't penetrate safely. The complexity and scope of the underground construction suggested a project involving dozens of people working over many years, not 4 missing campers struggling to survive in the wilderness. When we emerged from the chambers, we discovered that the stone messages above ground had been altered during our expedition. New symbols had appeared, and existing arrangements had been modified to include mathematical sequences that corresponded to our exact GPS coordinates and the dates of our investigation. Someone had been watching us work and responding to our presence in real time. Security cameras we'd placed around the site detected movement during the night hours, but the footage showed only shadows and unclear shapes that could have been human figures or natural phenomena. The implications of what we found in those chambers extend far beyond the Mendoza family disappearance. The underground network represents a level of organization and technical capability that challenges our understanding of what missing persons are capable of achieving when they choose to remain hidden. The evidence suggests that some disappeared individuals may not be lost or dead, but rather living in parallel societies that exist just outside the boundaries of normal human detection and interaction. Our investigation has identified similar stone message sites in remote areas across the western United States, all featuring the same geometric precision and astronomical alignments found at the Mendoza location. Satellite imagery reveals patterns that suggest these sites are connected by underground networks spanning hundreds of miles. The scope of these discoveries implies that what we initially thought was an isolated disappearance case may actually be evidence of a much larger phenomenon involving missing persons who have created their own hidden civilization in the wilderness areas of North America. The breakthrough that changed everything came 6 months after our expedition, when I received an encrypted email from someone claiming to be Sofia Mendoza. The message contained detailed photographs of the underground chambers we'd explored, but taken from angles and locations we'd never accessed. More disturbing, the photos showed our team working in the tunnels, captured by cameras we'd never detected. The images proved that someone had been watching our every move during the expedition, documenting our discoveries with equipment far more advanced than anything we'd brought with us. The email included coordinates to 17 additional sites across the western United States, each containing similar stone message arrays and underground networks. But what made my blood run cold was the mathematical precision of the coordinates themselves. They formed geometric patterns that corresponded exactly to ley lines and astronomical alignments that ancient civilizations had used for navigation and ritual purposes. Someone had been planning this network for far longer than the 40 years since the Mendoza family disappeared, suggesting connections to historical disappearances dating back decades or even centuries. Following the coordinates led me to discoveries that challenged everything I thought I knew about missing persons cases. At a remote site in Montana, I found stone arrangements spelling out the names of families who had disappeared in the 1960s and 1970s. In Utah, massive granite formations contained messages referencing missing hikers from the 1950s. Each site showed the same evidence of long-term habitation and underground construction, but the scale and sophistication increased dramatically with each location I investigated. The most shocking discovery was at a site in Nevada, where the stone messages included references to disappearances dating back to the 1800s. Historical research revealed that wagon trains and mining expeditions had vanished in that area during westward expansion, leaving no trace despite extensive search efforts. The stone arrangements contained family names and dates that matched historical records of missing persons from over a century ago. The implications were staggering. Either someone had spent generations researching and memorializing ancient disappearances, or the underground network had been operating continuously for far longer than anyone could have imagined. Advanced ground-penetrating radar at the Nevada site revealed the most extensive underground complex yet discovered. The network extended over 50 miles in multiple directions, with construction techniques that varied dramatically between sections. Older areas showed primitive stone-cutting methods consistent with 19th century tools, while newer sections incorporated engineering advances that wouldn't have been possible without modern technology. The progression suggested continuous development and improvement over more than a century, with each generation of occupants adding to the infrastructure left by their predecessors. Carbon dating of organic materials found throughout the network confirmed the timeline suggested by the construction evidence. Some artifacts dated to the 1840s, while others were clearly modern. DNA analysis revealed genetic material from dozens of different family lines, many matching records of people who had disappeared in the western United States over the past 150 years. The underground network wasn't just a hiding place for the Mendoza family. It was a multi-generational civilization built by missing persons who had chosen or been forced to live outside normal human society. Personal belongings found in the deeper chambers told stories of families who had adapted to underground life over multiple generations. Children's toys carved from stone suggested that some missing persons had not only survived their disappearances, but had raised families in the tunnels. Educational materials found throughout the complex included advanced mathematics, engineering texts, and astronomical charts that were far beyond what most missing persons would have possessed when they first disappeared. Someone had been systematically educating the underground population, developing capabilities that exceeded those of surface society. The most disturbing evidence was a series of journals documenting the recruitment and induction of new families into the underground network. The writers described systematic surveillance of potential candidates, families who showed specific combinations of technical skills, genetic traits, and psychological profiles that made them suitable for underground life. The Mendoza family fit the profile perfectly: an aerospace engineer, a mathematician, and intelligent children with wilderness survival skills. Their disappearance hadn't been accidental. They'd been specifically targeted and recruited. Medical facilities found in the deeper chambers revealed how the underground population had managed to survive and thrive despite being cut off from surface medical care. The equipment included surgical instruments, pharmaceutical laboratories, and genetic research facilities that were decades ahead of what would have been available to civilians in the 1980s. Most shocking were the medical records suggesting that the underground population had been conducting genetic experiments on themselves, systematically improving their physical and mental capabilities over multiple generations. The research facilities contained documentation of breeding programs designed to enhance intelligence, physical endurance, and resistance to environmental stresses. Children born in the underground network showed genetic modifications that allowed them to thrive in low-light conditions, process nutrients more efficiently, and resist diseases that would have been fatal to surface dwellers. The modifications were subtle but consistent, suggesting a long-term project to create a human subspecies perfectly adapted to underground life. Communication equipment found throughout the network revealed how the underground population had maintained contact with the surface world while remaining hidden. They had been monitoring radio frequencies, internet communications, and satellite imagery for decades, staying informed about technological developments and political changes that might affect their security. More disturbing, they had been influencing surface events through carefully placed agents who maintained normal lives while reporting back to the underground leadership. The agents included people in government positions, scientific institutions, and search and rescue organizations who had been systematically misdirecting investigations into missing persons cases. They ensured that search efforts never came close to discovering the underground networks, while simultaneously identifying new families with the genetic and psychological profiles needed for recruitment. The scope of the infiltration suggested that dozens of missing persons cases had been intentionally mishandled to protect the underground civilization. Financial records found in the complex revealed how the underground population had been funding their operations. They had been systematically mining precious metals and rare earth elements from geological formations throughout the network, then selling them through carefully established front companies. The operation generated millions of dollars annually, which they used to purchase advanced equipment and recruit surface scientists who could help develop their technological capabilities. The recruitment process involved identifying surface dwellers with specific skills needed for underground development, then creating situations that forced them to disappear. Scientists, engineers, and medical professionals had been systematically targeted over decades, with their disappearances made to look like accidents, mental breakdowns, or voluntary departures from society. The underground population had been building a brain trust of the most capable individuals from surface society, while ensuring that their absence would never be properly investigated. Evidence found in the command centers suggested that the underground network was preparing for something significant. References to surface integration and emergence protocols appeared throughout recent documentation, along with timelines suggesting that the hidden civilization was planning to reveal itself within the next few years. The preparation involved establishing surface facilities, training programs for underground dwellers to interact with normal society, and contingency plans for dealing with government responses to their emergence. The most chilling discovery was a complete database of every missing persons case in North America over the past 2 centuries, with detailed analysis of which disappearances were connected to the underground network and which were genuine accidents or crimes. The database revealed that nearly 30% of unexplained disappearances in wilderness areas were actually recruitments for the underground civilization. Thousands of people who were presumed dead had actually been living and working in the hidden network, developing capabilities that would have seemed impossible to surface dwellers. My investigation had uncovered evidence of the largest and most sophisticated conspiracy in human history, a multi-generational project to create a parallel civilization that existed just beneath the surface of normal society. The Mendoza family hadn't simply disappeared. They had been inducted into a hidden world that had been growing and developing for over a century, preparing for the day when they would emerge and fundamentally change the relationship between humanity and the natural world. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond any single missing persons case. The underground network represents a form of human evolution that has been occurring in secret, developing capabilities and knowledge that could revolutionize our understanding of what humans are capable of achieving when freed from the constraints of conventional society. The question is no longer what happened to missing families like the Mendozas, but what they've become during their decades of hidden development and what their emergence will mean for the rest of humanity. What do you think really happened to the Mendoza family? Were they somehow able to survive for years in the wilderness? Or did someone else create those stone messages? And what about the underground chambers and the evidence of ongoing activity? And now, with evidence of a multi-generational underground civilization recruiting missing persons for over a century, what do you think their ultimate plan really is? Leave your theory in the comments below.